So, hi and welcome. My name's Josie, and I hope that I've met lots of you before, but if I haven't, I'm one of the founders of Creative Access. So, we're really thrilled to be with such an amazing panel again. This is our fifth ever event in conjunction with the Radio Centre, and it's always a great one. And we know that, radio touches all of our lives, whether or not, every single one of us, unlike most of the creative industries, you can't avoid it. And we all, have our favourite station, our favourite, DJs that we've grown up with, and all, we've all got a really special connection. So we love doing this event, and we're really thrilled. So please do, make sure that you get a chance. And loads of people have submitted questions in advance, which but you can also ask questions, which I know Margherita will talk about. As far as I'm concerned, I just wanted to say thank you for all of you for joining us. Please do, we'll be live tweeting, we'll be doing an Instagram story, and we'll do a write-up tomorrow on our website, which you can see. So make sure you follow us on @_ Creative Access, and all these guys as well who are tagged in the Radio Centre too. I just wanted very quickly to thank the panel. I'm not going to come on at the end, but really to every single one of you, to Pria, to AJ, to Leanne. We're really thrilled that you've joined us, and especially to Margherita. Margherita and I have had quite a few conversations the last few months, and we have been trying to get her along to one of our events for some time. So it gives me a huge pleasure that you're actually here today, and we're really grateful to you for all your ongoing support. You are such a phenomenal role model, from Capitals to Classic to Heart, Smooth, everywhere. You have really been part of the life of this country, and it's a real honour for us to have you here. So on that note, I'm going to say goodbye and hand over to you, Margherita.
So much, Josie. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I know from all our panelists, like me, we are so passionate about the industry, about radio, about audio, and actually your journey, you watching right now, your journey into starting your career. And I know our professionals have so much to share about how you can take that first step. So it's a pleasure to meet you. If I haven't met you before, as Josie said, I have worked in the radio industry for several years, and I have loved every minute of that and still do. Broadcasting from Capital, my first station after BR&B, where I won a competition to get my first job, to where I am today, working at Classic and Smooth within the global radio brand. But the great thing about today is we are celebrating brands and companies across the UK, all of which could be great first homes for your first step, whether it's here at Global, where I'm speaking to you from today, or where AJ works at the Bauer, or the BBC, Leanne and Pria, where they work. There's so many ways you can get your start in the industry. So let me introduce you to this amazing panel, and then we'll get their take on how they began their careers and answer all your questions as well. The platform for asking questions, it's sli.do, so sli.do, and the event number is 61558 if you want to get those questions to us. We'll start with the amazing AJ King, who was, like me, a winner of the competition to begin his career. He is and will always and forever be the chosen one at KISS, now some 10 years into his amazing career at KISS. And I'm quite jealous of the ways and places around the world that he has broadcast from. Just the most amazing DJ career, real champion of new music across the UK as well. So it's a real pleasure to have AJ with us today. Pria broadcast, I cannot believe the amount that Pria has squeezed into just a few years in the industry. And over the summer, you will have heard her broadcasting on BBC Asian Network, on Radio 1, on 1 Extra. And she is not only working in the radio field, but TV as well, where she's a self-shooter for her stories and edits those too. And also working in the radio industry, not only telling these stories, but finding the stories that really need to be told, championing the voices that maybe don't find an easy way to hear their stories told. Although some of her brilliant pitches can end up with her travelling across parts of the UK to tell those stories as well, to every single corner of the UK. I'm sure she'll enlighten us on that a little bit later. But she's also a champion of you coming into the industry as well and finding your voice within the industry. And then I turn to our podcast queen, official title, podcast producer and consultant. I'll just call her a podcast queen, Leanne Alie, who we were lucky enough to have for a moment here working at Global, but now works at BBC Sounds and is a commissioner in podcasts as well. So it's brilliant that we have her here at 2 to speak about that way that you could also start your career. And if you are a fan, like I am, of Dope Black Dads and Dope Black Women, you will already know some of Leanne's work. She's also a champion of an amazing trust that could help you start your career. So I'm going to multi-track. I'm going to ask Leanne a bit more about that later on, but just it's great that we've got such a breadth of talent. I know lots of the questions that you've sent in have been about everyone's start in the industry. So if I can just give you each a couple of minutes to sort of take the floor and share that experience of how you began your journey with everyone watching today. AJ, if I might start with you. How did you get your break in the industry? If you could tell us that, where you are now, and did you always have a love of radio and audio?
Hello, everyone. So in answer to your question, yes, always had a love for radio, music. I listened to far more radio than I ever watched television when I was younger. And at the age of, I think, like 8, 9, told my mum, I'm going to be on Kiss. And so everything was kind of directed towards that. As far as my first initial break, was a community radio station in Harlesden, northwest London, called Life FM, which I joined. I was working at a bank at the time. I took every Wednesday off so that I could do my show, which meant I had to work every Saturday. That station then got an extended community license and some more funding. It then turned into a radio station called Bang Radio. So I was on there doing a plethora of shows, whether it was community radio shows, music mix shows, or playlisted shows as well. I then went to university to study a degree in the creative industries. Halfway through that, towards the end of that degree, I heard that KISS were running a competition called The Chosen One, which I entered. Luckily I won it. I got a contract which was for 3 months. Again, I told the manager, yo, you're not getting rid of me for at least about a year. And due to all of the experience which I had amassed, that was interviewing people, DJing, producing shows, alone, I was able to, do things that the guys at KISS didn't really expect me to do. So I was getting placed in a lot of fantastic places, able to do DJ gigs abroad, interview that person, and to date, I've presented on every show on the station, had an amazing time, as Margherita said, broadcast from some amazing locations around the world, and I'm still there, absolutely loving every bit now. So I hope that puts into perspective like that 12-year journey for you.
Thanks so much, AJ. We'll be back with you in a moment. And Pria, your journey was quite different coming into the business. Can you tell us about that and about the work you're doing?
Yeah, and hey guys, I think that's the biggest thing, is that I think all of us will have very different routes in. And so as much as we might be here to tell you how to get a career in the media industry, sorry, I don't think we'll actually have a definitive answer for you, but that's actually one of the best things. So for background, I kind of went to uni, did an undergrad, which wasn't in anything to do, it was in English, not totally unrelated, I guess, to go into journalism, but I kind of would use that time at uni to do as much of, I guess, the stuff that wouldn't cost me, i.e. do your student journalism, do your student TV, paper, whatever. But actually, I think then the best value was I then did journalism as a postgrad and was lucky enough to get a placement with the BBC, and you have to do it as part of your course to get your qualifications. So I was lucky enough to get the BBC. But then obviously you have to somehow turn an unpaid work placement into a paid job. And that's where, okay, it's huge to get your foot in the door, but you've actually then got to earn your worth there, make them think that they need to keep you as staff, and that becomes really tricky. And so same as AJ, I got given freelance shifts, and then you can try and turn that into a 3-month contract, and then you have to fight every time to get that extended, and eventually you get kind of kept on as staff, and it's so rewarding. But then every time you think you've got something, then the hard work begins again. So it's kind of you're always grafting a little bit. But I think the biggest thing is to skill yourself up with everything that you think you might never need, because you will always need it. Before I got to the BBC, had learned how to film myself. I'd learned how to, I could then operate like a studio myself, so that I knew how to I could operate, you know, I could do bulletins, for example, news bulletins, and you can then be called on in an emergency situation. And once you show yourself up in an emergency situation, then all of a sudden bosses can trust you. So it's just about using everything that lands on your plate, even if you don't expect it to somehow get your foot slightly higher up the ladder each time, I'd say.
Thank you so much, Pria. And I guess one of the skills of broadcasting is managing to keep going when there's background interference coming from somewhere. So I don't know if Josie or the team at Radiocentre or Creative Access could check into that. I think someone's left their mic unmuted. But thank you very much, Pria. One of the great skills of a journalist. Wherever the story is, whatever's going on around you, you still have to keep bringing people the message. So Leanne, if I can turn to you, can you tell us about your start? Podcasting, it seems to still be growing as an industry. How did you first get into it? What was your journey into working with audio?
Yeah, so my journey was like pretty unconventional as well, really. So I actually studied marketing, and I actually thought I was going to have like an advertising career and a marketing career and like kind of work with big brands and things like that, which is something I was interested in but not like hugely passionate about. It was just kind of the journey I was going on, because I actually started out working at Spotify in their global partnerships teams. But whilst I was there, I was also very passionate about diversity and inclusion, and I have been kind of like in every single job that I've been in, kind of like prior to that as well. So I actually started a diversity and inclusion group within the business, kind of what like other businesses would call like an ERG, like an employee resource group. And I started it with one other colleague, and at the time the London office was pretty small, and I started working with different parts of the business to kind of try and look at the representation issues that they were facing and kind of try to kind of like work with them to improve that. So I got to be working across all different parts of the business, even though I was working in like a sales department. And one of the projects I worked on was the Sound Up Bootcamp, which was a podcast bootcamp for women of colour in its very first year. And shortly after that, I actually got made redundant, and actually no one expects to get made redundant, especially like in your very first job. So it kind of like took me for 6, and kind of after that I was just thinking about like reevaluating and what to do next. But I'd kind of been listening to podcasts for like 5 years. I've loved podcasts for years, and it's just, I love podcasts because you really get to hear from people that you don't get to hear from necessarily in mainstream media. And it's kind of like for the first time I felt like I was hearing from people that are like me and kind of deal with things that I deal with, and I absolutely loved it. So kind of based on that, I got a referral to work on the British Podcast Awards last year, kind of in a consultative capacity, looking at their diversity and inclusion. And that's actually the year that George the Poet won 5 awards, because literally nobody knew who he was before that, which is just actually mad to me if you've heard his podcast. And then I kind of just ran with it and was like, because there's a lot of people doing the diversity thing in the marketing space and the advertising space, which I kind of saw when I was in that industry. But then when I moved over to audio and kind of like started exploring there, I kind of found that the industry was a lot smaller. There was kind of like the same issues there, but there wasn't really many people kind of trying to do the hands-on work in this space. So I basically just ran with it and kind of just started looking at kind of like other similar events and organizations to work with. So I worked with the London Podcast Festival and Audio Production Awards, and it's kind of just, it was just me kind of coming to them saying kind of like, this is the service that you need and this is the effect that it can have, kind of like based of the success of the British Podcast Awards. And that's kind of how I positioned myself to platforms in the audio industry. So kind of alongside that, I was still looking for like a full-time job, and a job came up at Global for a project management role. So it's pretty much more in line with kind of my experience and stuff. But whilst I was there, I have to give like a massive credit to like the people I was working with. There's 2 of the producers in my team, Lauren and Chris, and I basically said to them, it was about 6 months in, I was like, guys, I just want to learn, like, teach me production, like, teach me how to edit, teach me how to produce, like, let me just come sit in on all these recordings and stuff, because I was looking after podcasts from like a project management perspective. I wasn't getting any hands-on production experience. So they were absolutely great, and they taught me most of what I know, to be honest. And then it was just kind of networking. Like I was going to like all the different audio events, the awards, festivals and everything, and I just love going to like live podcast shows as well. And one of the shows that I went to was Don't Black Dad's live show, And a few months later, Marvin just calls me up, who kind of like heads up Black Dads, and is like, "Oh, Leanne, we need a producer on our podcast." And at the time, I'd only like co-produced a couple shows, but I was like, you know what? Of course, I will do it. I will learn everything I need to know, and I will be there. And it's almost been a year later, and now I'm working at podcast commissioning at the BBC and BBC Sounds, and working on like development for a load of shows across Radio 1, 1Extra, and Asian Network.
I think seizing the moment is something that I know, speaking to you all, has been part of your career, just making the most of that opportunity when it comes your way. But if I can go to the question that everyone that pre-submitted a question, the overriding question seemed to be, at the start, how do you get that break, especially in the current climate? If I just read a couple of them so we get a sense of that. Payal, I hope I pronounced that correctly, has got in touch to say, how can you get into radio if you haven't ever worked in the area before and you're now just out of university? Sam, it's tough enough to get any job at the moment, let alone in radio. What would a graduate like me have to do to stand out for an employer? Angela's got in touch. How can I get an entry-level internship, especially at the moment? Pfizer's got in touch to say, what are some of the steps we should take to kick off our career? Amber mentioned, how do you get local radio stations to give you a chance or just even allow you work experience? How, especially in the current climate, do you get that break? What would you do? What would you advise? Or how do you stand out to get that break? Leanne, do you want to kick off?
Okay. That I would suggest like a couple of like really practical things, because I know kind of like obviously the current climate is very difficult, but I would kind of like use kind of the tools and skills that you have at your disposal to your advantage. So if it's production experience that you're wanting to get, I would almost kind of, if you wanted to start your own podcast, definitely start your own podcast, because that gives you a space to experiment, not just in terms of production, but if presenting is something you wanted to go into as well, kind of like finding your like podcast tone of voice. You can also look for other independent podcasts that are looking for production assistants and kind of reach out to them and like kind of see what you can do, kind of like developing those. And also there is something that is called the Equality in Audio Pact, which was created by Renee Richardson at Broccoli Content. And that is kind of like 5 core things that a load of companies in the audio industry have signed up to basically, it's their commitment to better representation in the industry. If you go on the website, Equality in Audio, I think it's equalityinaudio.com, but if you go via Broccoli, you'll be able to find it. They have the list of all the companies that have signed up to this pact. So go through them, kind of go like dive into them, kind of look at like the work that they're doing, and like from that kind of you'll be able to kind of like figure out kind of the sorts of companies that you might like to be working with and working for. And then from that kind of do a little LinkedIn research, Twitter research, kind of find out who their head of production is, kind of send them an email kind of stating what you're interested in doing, kind of where your expertise lies, kind of what experience you have, and kind of just offer yourself up to experience and stuff. Because I know it's difficult, but I think you will kind of get a lot more response from those independent production companies, especially now, because whereas, and I know from like commissioning, kind of a lot was kind of put on hold earlier in the year, and now like commissioning is like ramping up again. So I think they will be looking for more production help. So that's kind of how I would go about it. And that goes for both either like radio and podcasts.
So do the homework and do the research and find out who's looking in that area, who's really championing those opportunities. Pria, what about you? What would you advise for those starting off right now?
So first up, I'd never worked a day radio in my life, and my first job was in radio. So you don't need to have worked in radio. What I had done is, okay, and granted, I was getting a job in news, so I was still working in the kind of news area. But what was most important for my boss and the people who gave me a job was that I kind of had the skills that were transferable. And so the actual platform wasn't irrelevant, but I could, you know, I had the journalistic skills, I guess, that kind of got me in the door. And then when I was there, I learned how to do radio. I was so scared that as a really young, I felt like a girl at the time, as a young lady coming into the industry, that especially on radio, I was going to sound really young. I'm doing the news, like who would listen to what I've got to say type thing was kind of in my head. But that's the thing, it was only in my head, because at the end of the day, someone somewhere thought it was a good idea to give me a chance. And it's then, I think, thinking to yourself, rather than thinking, I've never done radio, I can't do this, thinking, what have I got? Why am I in this room or in this meeting right now with all of these people who look really senior, or they're familiar faces because you've only ever heard them on first day at the BBC. I was in the lift with Trevor Nelson. I was like, right, okay, I can't do this here. But you can, because, you know, he had his first day at the BBC one day too, and that was mine. So it's kind of a mix between using what you do have, and what you do have is your own individual experience, whether that's life experience and all the things that kind of give you your identity, that make you unique enough to be A, remembered, and B, worthy of doing a job or telling a story and bringing your own perspective over somebody else, and B, you have all the skills that you do have, rather than focusing on the ones that you don't have, because skills can be learned, experience is invaluable, and then it's just a case of when you do kind of allow some, you know, when someone does say to you, okay, you can come in for one freelance shift, or you can come in for one shadow shift, or something like that, then you just ask all the right questions. You ask to do the stuff that you've never done before, rather than sitting in your comfort zone, because actually it's more about, I think, and I think this is why this industry is always a journey and we're learning every day, and this whole kind of webinar will learn just as much as all of you guys, is because you actually you never know everything. I've done so many things this week alone where I've learned new things. I've been in situations that I've never been in before. And so you just can't be scared, and you've got to always think to yourself, okay, why did that person get a job that I really wanted? And it's because they at least put themselves in the race, and you've got to be in it to win it. So kind of just back yourselves. And if you've got the passion to do something, you know in yourself, you will find a way of doing it.
I think identity and using all your experience is something that I know that is important to all of you. So I'm going to come back to Leanne and AJ on that. But AJ, let's just talk about your start in the business. Like me, winning a competition. But what would be your advice, words of wisdom to those just starting out? You've left uni, or you just left school. What would you say to someone that was like you, listening to a radio station or listening to a great podcast, wanting to work in that area? Oh, have I got your audio, AJ?
Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Okay, sorry, just to build off what Leanne and Pria said, do everything that they said. I'm lucky in that I've been able to see how radio and television looked before the advent of social media, and it was a very, very different landscape. Now I look at it and I'm like, for anyone who's coming out of university, college, or whatever, whoever you rate who does podcasts or who has a YouTube channel or whatnot, or is doing something that you want to do, research them to the fullest, where they started, how they grew, what equipment they used, everything. All right, that'll be my first port of call. As Priya said as well, skill up, because we are now in a state where you can record content on your phone, you can edit it on your phone, you can post it to multiple platforms on your phone. And so as far as, you know, barriers to entry, as far as that's concerned, very, very low. Another thing which I do is I go where the people are not. Right? In radio, none of us have chosen to be a presenter. There's a set amount of positions, and then we get picked or whatever. So if you're going for a spot or a station or an opportunity where you know there's loads of people who are going to be there, maybe circumnavigate. Go to a hospital radio station. Go to a radio station maybe out of London. Build up your skill and your reputation there, because then when everyone's at their next stage and you're all going forward for that other part, you've been a producer, you've done a podcast, you've interviewed X, Y, and Z. Whereas if you've got your break at a big station, there'll be other people in front of you who would just be doing those roles. So bear that in mind as well. A little bit of a tricky one to kind of get your head around at first. And also bring value. Bring value. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. Those people who fund podcasts, or if it's a commercial radio station or the BBC, they want to know, okay, what can you bring? Like everybody else said earlier, your personal experience and your stories are invaluable. So decide how you're going to articulate them, what you're going to be. I was speaking to Margherita yesterday, And I just explained to her, I was like, yeah, revel in the struggle, revel in the fact that you aren't where you want to be. Like, put all that focus inward on learning as much as you can. I'm a DJ. Every minute there's a new piece of DJ equipment, a new piece of software. If you're an editor, there's always upgrades and stuff. You have to be continually learning and continually aware. So as far as getting a break, no one can guarantee who it's going to be with or when it's going to happen. But like Pria said, make sure you're ready, make sure like you're open-minded, and yeah, think of what you're bringing that AJ can't bring, or whoever, yeah, and focusing on that, and focus on how to articulate that.
You talked about that sort of celebration almost of the rejection, reveling in the rejection. Can I ask you, because it's tough in the business and anyone starting in the business is going to find it difficult, but I know that's something you've spoken passionately about before, AJ. Can I ask you each, how have you coped with the rejections along the way during your career? AJ, let me start with you, because I know that actually sort of celebrating that rejection is something you're...
Yeah. I mean, look, like when it came to me going to KISS was where I wanted to be since I was 8 years old. Like I bombarded them with my demos. I flooded them with my demos to the point they got back to me. They're like, you are too much. Stop. You need to learn. You need to learn and come back to us. And I'm not gonna lie, I was really, really hurt. I was so hurt because in my mind, I was ready. I was the guy. Clearly I wasn't. So that rejection, understand, yeah, that rejection's gonna happen. Rejection's gonna happen like to your face. It doesn't matter how well prepared you were or whatnot. It just might be that person at the time has found someone more appropriate. They've got a more appropriate voice or look, or, you know, they can bring something to the table that you can't. And then another thing is, I can't remember who it was, Pria or Leanne, you know, if somebody does get the job, why did they get the job? Look at why they got that job. Rejection's gonna happen, mate. It happens all the time. So just count it as part of the process, deep breaths, skill up, and, you know, keep it moving.
What about you in the journalism industry or the news industry? Because you must get that not only with jobs, but with the stories you're putting forward that you really are passionate about championing.
Yeah, you can honestly feel like you've spent days working on a story and then you think, right, this is going to be an exclusive, or I've got this killer contact, no one else can possibly have it. You go and pitch it and they're like, oh, well, we did that in this way about 2 weeks ago. Or they just don't see your vision. And that's where, and so this is where, like, if you've pitched a story, or if you're kind of pitching yourself as a journalist to someone who you want to give you a job, it's kind of like two options. You can either look at it and think, actually, you know what, they're kind of right, it's not worth it. You can then learn from it, but ask them for feedback. Always ask, and some people might just not give it to you, but always ask for the reasons why you haven't got something. But then if not, you can think, well, actually, no, this, maybe you want to tweak it, or, you know, tweak your approach, but actually I've got the experience, or I am the person that needs to be telling this story. Maybe go elsewhere, go to a different, in the case of me, I'll maybe go to a different department within the BBC and ask them to commission something. Or it's because you've got to be aware of, not only is there a particular story you might want to tell, but you've got to be aware of who you're telling it to. And that it might be that the story itself, there's nothing wrong with it and it's a really good idea, but you're kind of going about pitching it in the wrong way, or to the wrong person, to the wrong audience. And so you've kind of got to just take a step back when you get rejected, take it on the chin. And that's the other thing in the media industry or anything like that, where, especially if you're on air at the time, kind of what happens on air stays on air. Don't take it personally, because as in life, you'll get rejected. As AJ said, like, rejection does just happen. And I just think you've got to use it as something that's going to build your character and your ability to be a bit resilient, but also actually just then use that feedback and that criticism to make yourself better.
Resilience is also something that I want to come back to. But Leanne, let me ask you, because you mentioned earlier about actually losing a job, but how do you cope with that? Must feel like a rejection when actually it could just be a business headcount situation. How have you coped with that along your career, and what advice would you pass forward to those that might face it in their early years?
Yeah, no, I actually took that very personally, even though I probably shouldn't have, because, you know, these things happen like in the corporate world. And that really taught me a massive lesson, because I could have either kind of just, you know, just sat on it and kind of like leveled in it. But instead I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna kind of like take this with both hands, kind of do something completely different. And I'm like a very kind of, I love like meeting people, I love networking, I like kind of like building relationships in that way. So that was a skill that I kind of just ran with and decided, you know what, let me go meet X person here, this person there. I made a whole list of people that I met in that job and was like, okay, we need to go for coffee, let's like meet up. Like, even if it didn't necessarily lead to like a lead, it's just really good to kind of like keep those relationships warm and like build those relationships. And I think kind of when it comes to rejection, because like imposter syndrome is something that I kind of like suffer with a lot, and there was a situation recently and I was like, I will never ever let this cripple me ever again, because there was a situation recently where there's a job that I almost didn't go to for reasons that I can't even explain. I think it was just imposter syndrome, to be honest, and I ended up getting shortlisted. I didn't get it in the end, but I ended up getting shortlisted, and that just showed me, I was like, do not ever doubt yourself again. The only person that will believe in you and your source is you. And positive affirmations, they work the same way as negative affirmations. So if you're telling yourself you're not good enough and you're not going to get this opportunity, you are going to believe it. Whereas if you tell yourself you are good enough and you are going to get these opportunities, you are more likely to go in there with confidence and like get the opportunities that you want. And especially in a world like radio and podcasts, like when your personality is kind of at the forefront and it's key and that's what people buy into, it's really important to have that self-belief in yourself. And I think almost kind of like reflecting on like commissioning as well, because I get sent like loads of pictures like all the time, and it's just unfortunate that we just don't have the budgets to commission everything. But even with that, I tell people I always give feedback. I love giving people the advice, like if it's not something that we can commission right now, do go look elsewhere at other platforms, other indies, and like pitch your ideas elsewhere. Like this is an industry, you can shop around, you can go to other places. Like there aren't just 3 broadcasters like in the UK, there are loads of other platforms that you can be working with. And with that as well, if you're still not kind of getting through, start yourself. Literally create if the space isn't being created for you, create the space yourself and start making stuff yourself, and then that's how kind of you can get ahead. Because if you look at podcasts like The Receipts and Free Shots, they didn't start off with a Spotify contract. That happened like 4 years down the line in their podcast journeys. So that's kind of, those are a few things that I would think about.
Just picking up on what you said about that internal feeling of not being confident enough to step forward. Now, AJ, you've obviously got a ton of confidence, but there must be moments along the journey where you think, do I put myself forward for that? How do you find that in yourself in those moments of doubt?
Okie dokie. So it's funny you say I've got a ton of confidence. Back in the day, I was so shy, I couldn't go into a shop to hand my CV in, right? So I was like, look, this can't happen. So I took a job as a waiter in Harvester, which made me have to talk to people and learn to communicate with like big groups of people. So sorry, what was the question again? It was
lacking confidence, which I don't think you do anymore. So, but it's about when the job comes along and you think, oh my goodness, I really have that in me. So I step up and take it. I know when I was first offered the chance to move from BR&B, where I started out in the regions, to Capital in London, where I grew up, it was, that's a dream, but I wasn't sure. I was like, oh, well, I'll do it in a year, then I'll be ready for it. But actually, sometimes you just have to go for it, which I did. How do you find that in those moments?
You've literally just got to bet on yourself, and like Leanne said, recognize that you're there for a reason. Like these people have seen something in you that they class as valuable. So yeah, you literally just have to bet on yourself and believe that whatever occurs in that situation, you may get the job, you may not get the job, that you've learned something from it. Like change your thinking into a like learning mindset. That's how I build my sort of confidence and repetition. Like I'm always on the decks, I'm always practicing, I'm always writing links, I'm always thinking of cool ways to say things, switching things around. The reason why we're not confident in things is because we've not done them before. If you've not driven before, you're going to be very, very apprehensive. If you've not spoken on the microphone before, you're going to be very, very apprehensive. So as soon as you recognize that, if you fortify yourself with that experience, and yeah, don't get me wrong, there's been times, I remember the first time I was ever at the O2 Arena, I was on stage presenting with Clara Amfo. I was giving out an award, and the sound of everybody in that arena was so loud, the stage was shaking, and I've never experienced that before. But I was on stage and I had to deliver. So sometimes if you know that you have an issue with, putting yourself forward or whatever, put yourself in that position, man. Put yourself in that position. That's what I would say to you. I do it all, like literally all the time, and it pays off.
It's about getting the skills, building your skill set constantly. That's what I'm getting from all of you. Pria, what about you? And that sense of are you the person that can really go for this job? How do you find that in yourself sometimes, especially when you're starting out?
I think my advice generally for everything is just back yourself and see what happens, because what's the worst thing that can happen? Oh, you learn a lesson. And it is always, I think the thing is you've never done everything. And so I think what I said right at the start is that you're always doing new things, especially in this industry. And for example, this week I did my first story where literally at the drop of the hat, I was told I had to cover a story with Prince Wills and Kate. And I was like, oh my God, what do I do? What do I wear? More to the point, but what do I actually do? And the thing is that you kind of get there and there's loads of people, really experienced journalists, photographers, whatever, and they're in what we call the royal rota, i.e. those are the people that always cover royal stories. They kind of just look at each other and they just know what they're thinking and they know what's going on. But actually they all were like, oh, hi, you're Pria, you're from da 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 da. And I was like, oh, okay, like I'm a somebody here. And so that's when you realize that all this kind of lack of confidence and this imposter syndrome and this who am I, it's in your head. And okay, we should also say always be humble. Don't get ahead of yourself and start thinking, oh yeah, okay, I'm Pria, because no one will like you and you need people to be on your side. This is a team-based industry, but it's a fine line, and I do think it's about backing yourself, because at the end of the day you've been hired, you've got a job, so you're there clearly because you can do it.
Thank you so much, Pria. We've got some great questions coming in and they're sort of directed at each of you, so if I can fire through a few of those. Leanne, this one definitely for you. Can you offer any advice on how to produce and market your own podcast?
Yes. So in terms of production, kind of think about what is the unique sell of your podcast? What is your unique tone of voice? What's the unique part of your story? Because there are loads of podcasts out there, and that shouldn't ever put you off from making what you want to create. It's just kind of figuring out what is the unique part of your podcast and your story that you want to put out there. Make sure you have a very strong beginning and end. So make sure you tell your audience who you are, what you're going to be talking about, why they should even care, why you're telling these stories and that sort of thing. And then really experiment with format, kind of look at different segments, different treatments, kind of look at the podcasts that you love listening to and like think about why you love listening to them and kind of maybe adopt kind of like some of the things that they do. And in terms of marketing, sharing audiences is, I think, a great way to kind of really build your own audience, because podcasting is a very collaborative industry. So if you want to do like a guest swap, so say you come onto somebody else's podcast, they come onto yours, that's a great way to share audiences. Also, social media is like a great way to discover podcasts, so make sure you're also creating social content to go alongside your podcast, whether that be clips from your show and things like that. But also just think about kind of who your audience is and where you can engage with them and where you can find them and what other platforms and people they interact with, and kind of see if you can collaborate with those, kind of really build your audience. So those are kind of like my top tips, and keep going, because the thing about podcasting is that you will not create an audience overnight, and consistency and perseverance is key.
That overnight success takes a moment. Ties into a question. I think, AJ, if I can direct this one at you, you were talking, Leanne, about making sure it's not just the podcast, but you're out there on as many platforms as you can. And I hope I'm pronouncing all these names correctly. Thomas has just got in touch to say, people often tell me radio is old-fashioned. I know it isn't, but how do I marry my radio show with more modern mediums like social media? And AJ, I know you're so across. Actually, you've got to be there in not just in a show, but in every kind of way.
Hi, Thomas. Cool question, man. So if you wanted to, for instance, marry your... One thing that I want to say to everyone is that all of these questions, we see the answers to all these questions all the time, whether it's in people that you follow or whatnot, all the techniques and things that we're wondering, we see them, but because it's all around us, we don't necessarily pick it apart. So with regards to how to place your radio show on social media, like, look at what Kiss do. You know, we have a 4-hour breakfast show, but if you jump on our Instagram page, it'll be just like the really cool bits, like the lead-in bits. So it'll be, you know, Jordan and Perry, if they're talking to Miley Cyrus, like a really crazy question they've asked her, she's just about to answer, bam, go check out my podcast or go look at the full YouTube video. Same with Twitter as well, or any social platform. That's where you will, you know, leave breadcrumbs for your listeners or your fans to culminate in like the main program, whether it's your radio show or whether it's a podcast you've done in Vision or not. So I'm just trying to think any other ways as well, and learn them as well. I was talking about learning as well. Instagram Reels has just come out. YouTube, I'm doing a version of Reels as well. All these things like we need to be aware of. So then, Thomas, you'd be thinking, all right, cool. What sort of content should I do for Reels, or what sort of content do people want to see? And you'll get that because we have all the analytics now as well, whether it's Google Analytics or the analytics that Instagram show you, which show where people are listening or engaging, the age, whether they're male or female. So much information we can assimilate and, you know, focus our output on. I'm looking at my hands like I have the answers. I do have the answers. But yes, Thomas, I hope that answers your question.
So you've got to do the work, right? You've got to do, it's not just about the day job, which might be a radio show. It's about being multi-skilled in everything you're doing.
Indeed. And just being really, really aware of what's happening. You know, we are, a lot of DJs I speak to as well, like you have to be so technologically minded nowadays. So, you know, as much as we talk about music, we also talk about memory and RAM and, you know, motherboards and all this kind of stuff, which I didn't envisage when I started DJing playing vinyl, you know. So, and it's also one thing that we all like to do is share stories, whether it's our own stories or somebody else's. And you get someone's story by asking questions and being inquisitive and getting information. So if you apply that to what you're doing, you know, Thomas, you can, there are thousands of resources online that will help you, you know, learn how to utilize social media. The BBC, I'm sure, have got like loads of stuff as well. And like I said, use your eyes. Whoever you follow, whoever you think's popping, how are they using social media? How often are they posting? What are they posting? What are they alluding to? What are they promising? And then how do they deliver? So like I said, we see all of these techniques at play. It is now for you to say, okay, Thomas, I've got my show. How am I going to use everything I've learned and chop it up and put it out into the world?
Questions coming in, the event number again on, it's sli.do and the event number is 61558. Pria, if I can address this to you, it's an anonymous text. Add your names in. It's nice to know who's listening right now and watching. How valuable are non-uni recognized courses? I guess if you're, especially in that journalism field, should you still go after the qualifications, or is it about experience? Is it a combination of both? What would your take on that be?
I'd say, well, this is where it's all very fluid and it is a bit of a combination of everything. The good thing about qualification is that for an employer, it kind of shows that you're at maybe a base level, and especially for journalism, during those kind of journalistic school type qualifications, you'll have learned things that are to do with media law, which is part of then editors being able to trust you when you're doing stories, that you kind of know the basics of what's right and wrong. That all said, for example, at BBC, you can then, when you do get a job, because there are plenty of people who won't have done a postgraduate degree in journalism like I did, for example, they have also got kind of foundation level courses for journalists, and those are the things that staff get when they're already there. So you don't have to be, you know, not having a job to do that. And then you can do media law refreshers. Even now, I still go and do stuff like court reporting refreshers or anything that's actually really quite tricky. And, you know, the guidelines that we have to follow is genuinely a book about this thick. I can't go around, it's not in my head, but you know, there is a lot of help when you are in the door. It's not like when you get the job you're expected to be able to just do it, because we can't. And so I think it depends, you know, how much you want to hit the ground running, which is obviously always great, but don't expect yourself to hit the ground running even if you do have the qualification, because I think about 70% of what I've learned in the years since I graduated and since I started working.
Thank you, Pria. So that's a great question, and this is to all of you because I think it impacts any situation. It comes in from Seni. Tips on interviewing people. They've asked about making it funnier, but I think in all situations, interviewing is doing it well is a real skill, whether it's the biggest music star in the world, or maybe you're interviewing someone who has just come out of a difficult situation and a news story, or maybe Leanne getting someone to tell you their life story within a podcast. What would be your advice when it comes to interviewing? Leanne, if I could start with you.
So I'll say like two things. If you're interviewing someone that is well known, I would have a look at their previous interviews and kind of look at all the things that they've like usually say, because you'll probably see that there's a pattern, like the stories that they usually tell and the things they usually say. And then when you've established that, kind of think about what things you want to pull out of them they don't usually talk about within reason. So that's what I'd say if you're interviewing someone well known. If you're interviewing someone who's got a really interesting story to tell, or who isn't well known in that sense, I would just try and kind of put them at ease as much as possible. Because like when I'm doing like pre-production calls and stuff for the podcast, and like, I've spoken to people that have been in like really terrible like abuse situations, or have had or do like really interesting careers and stuff, and it's just kind of putting them at ease and letting them know that this isn't necessarily an interview, this is just a conversation, discussion, and I would just talk to them as I normally would, and then probe on specific things that I think are interesting. And it's just like you having a normal conversation. It's just like, tell me more about that specific thing, and like, how did this happen, and how did you feel? And if you can get the emotives out of that as well, that's kind of what I think makes the interview more interesting. And if it's in terms of like funny stuff, then I would try and get a sense of kind of what makes them tick, like what are they interested in, how can you build a rapport with them to kind of get that fun side out of them.
Thank you. AJ, you must have interviewed some of the biggest music names going, and also sometimes they've done the interview circuit, they've launched a new album, or what's your advice when you're interviewing those superstars that you may be in awe of as well?
Yes, so you mentioned superstars dropping albums, etc. The reason why that person is sitting in front of you is they've got something that they want everyone else to know about. That's why. So that is the first thing that you need to bear in mind. They are here for a purpose, to speak about and to amplify their new clothing line, their new movie, their new collaboration, whatever it is, right? So I've written down a few things. First thing I would say, as Leanne said, is research. Make sure you are well researched. Even if your producer hands you a sheet of all the facts, make sure that those facts are actually facts and not some rumor or whatnot. Check for yourself, because there are certain people who will just, check you and just be like, no, that's not correct. And it just throws the entire interview. Make them feel comfortable as well. One thing that I do, if I'm hosting a live event, I go into the audience beforehand and I say hi to everyone, because then I feel better about talking to people. It just makes me less nervous. When everyone's setting up or whatnot, have that confidence, man. Recognize you are an interviewer. Like, you've got the mic. This setup is for them. You're welcoming them into your space. So, do the small talk thing. How are you? What not? I really liked and be smart. They're human beings at the end of the day. Gauge the mood. Some people are like on and off. They come into the studio, they'll just be in the corner. As soon as it's time to go, it's a different person. They're in pro mode, and you're just like, oh my God. So there's one thing. What else? Listen as well. So as they're speaking, you might have your list of questions. You might have that 30-second countdown or whatnot. But they might say something which could lead to that scoop that Pria was saying, or that piece of information, which means that everyone's going to be watching your content and not their content. Do you understand what I mean? Also, what was I going to say? Yeah, just be researched, be calm. Don't accidentally hang up on Tom Cruise when he calls you from the red carpet, on the breakfast show, not even your own show, but you're covering it. But yeah, that happened to me. But, you know, again, like Margherita said, things happen. So you just got to style it out, be professional, and just deliver. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, research would be my main thing. And if you want to make it funny, I mean, there's a guy called Nardwar. There's anyone that, there's a guy called Nardwar, Nardaur. He interviews everyone from like Lil Uzi Vert to John Legend or whatnot. And the facts that he manages to unearth about everybody that he interviews, from Snoop Dogg, Pharrell or whatnot, these people have no idea how he knows this stuff. I don't know how he knows this stuff, but that's why I know him, because he garners these reactions from people, and he's a bit of a legend. But check him out if you're thinking of like a comedic way to, you know, open people up.
Thank you. I think that thing you said about listening is actually one of the most important skills in radio and the audio industry. Although we may feel like we're coming with a great question to the table, actually listening to what your guests are telling you is that moment where they give you the scoop. And if they like you, they're going to help you with that. So we've just got a few minutes left. So if you have got a question, 61558, get those in now. Ask a last question or two to this amazing panel. Pria, you may have to interview people in some quite difficult situations. Maybe they're telling their story for the first time. Maybe it's a new story that is quite a hard one to speak to people about if they've been through something very difficult. Or maybe you're, you know, whether it's a Wills and Kate moment, you must have to, the skill set you must have is immense. What are your interview tips?
When you're putting a news program together, 1 minute you can be doing Brexit, then you're doing somebody who might be an abuse survivor, and then you're doing something that one year KFC was running out of chicken, and it's a KFC chicken lover. I was like, seriously? But the common denominator is to be a human being. You're there asking the questions because the audience can't be there. So what is it that they want to know? So you need to be a human, but you need to slightly leave yourself at home and be totally selfless. So you need to, in order to do that, be in touch with the audience. What is it that's really kind of either the social buzz that's been talked about that people want the answers to, or with Brexit, for example, leave the big words and all the jargon at home and just ask things like you might talk about it, explain something to your friends in the pub. And so in that sense, it's kind of the best thing to do is to be human, but you're an informed human being, because you need to be, as AJ said, tooled up and kind of geared up with the facts so that you can ask the kind of poignant, intelligent questions, but without acting like you're kind of smarter than the people that you're trying to serve. And then I think when it's a really sensitive interview subject or person, give them the space to kind of feel like they're not being pressured into saying that kind of soundbite that you might be really expecting from them. And in order to do that, you might have to give in a little bit of yourself to the situation. And that doesn't mean that you're taking over. It just kind of builds that rapport, as Leanne was saying, and builds that kind of trust, because at the end of the day, if someone's going to tell their deepest, darkest secret to you, you've got to be worthy of it. And so I think it's kind of just about remembering why it is you're doing the interview, and then what you want to get out of it, essentially. And at the end of the day, that has always got to be for the audience, not you, however much you are fangirling.
It being about the audience is really, I think that is such an important thing to remember. As much as we want to be part of the industry, why are we doing this? It's a question that's coming from Callum as we sort of wrap up our conversation. If you weren't in the industry, let's look at your other lives that you may have led. If podcasting and radio didn't exist, what occupations would you have wanted to do instead? AJ, where would you have been if it wasn't for radio?
So as I said at the beginning, I was working in a bank as a personal banker before something happened in my life, and I was like, right, this can't happen. I need to just be the star that I want to be in. So I might be like a banker, but I also I'm a mentor as well. So I work with the Prince's Trust. I work with another charity called Bang Entertainment, and I mentor and educate and just try and inspire people who, like me, you know, want to get the most out of their life or their intention. And I just, you know, share my knowledge and my experience, give them templates to work with. So it would probably be something like that, teaching, if I wasn't able to play loud music and have fun on the radio.
I'm sure you find a way of bringing that into schools somehow. Leanne, can you also tell us what you wouldn't have been doing, and also a bit about the trust while we still have a moment or two that you're involved in multi-track?
Yeah. If I wasn't doing podcasting, based on my degree and my first job and the trajectory I was going on, I'd probably be like an account manager in an advertising agency, which is fine. And it's a very good path to go on. It's just not, well, I realise it's just not what I'm passionate about at all. And that kind of being in podcasting as well kind of led me to multi-track. I kind of got involved with them early last year, and it was a group of, I think it was like 8 individuals of us, all from like different parts of the audio industry, kind of like different stages of our careers, and we all kind of just came together to try and address the changes within, well, the issues within the audio industry in terms of representation. And what we created was an audio production internship scheme specifically for people of colour and those from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And we partnered at the time with 6 independent production companies, which were Whistledown, Muddy Knees, was it Muddy Knees? Reduced Listening, Loftus, 7 Digital, and there was one other, I can't quite remember. But if you go on the website, you'll find it. And it was 2-month internship, so you do 1 month in one indie and another month in another. And we'd also organise training sessions alongside, so like all our fellows learn everything from kind of how to interview, to how to edit, how to create sound design, like everything in the space of 2 months. And the program's been really amazing, and kind of the fellows from last year, one of them is now kind of on the production team for One Extra Talks. 3 of them in fact had shows commissioned for Radio 4, which were broadcast a couple of weeks ago. One of them is working with iHeart, like they're all doing like really amazing things that really kind of like kicked off their audio career. So the team's going into its 2nd year this year, and applications I think will be open within the next couple of months, and we have more indies working with us this year, so there'll be more places for more people. So yeah, go check out Multitrack on Instagram, Twitter, and the website is multitrackfellowship.com.
Exciting opportunities. And Pria, if you weren't interviewing royalty or traveling to, I know you've pitched some ideas that have taken you to the furthest corners of the UK. What would you have been doing in another life, as it were? Which,
by the way, if people wondering, was the Outer Hebrides, to go to the most northern mosque in the UK for a Muslim community of about 50 people. It was totally incredible. But I'm still out here trying to make it as a swimmer, and I'm glad I found a different job because I was never good enough, and I was obsessed with swimming, and I would train every day, but it's a good job I was still going to school because I was never going to make it to GB. But yeah, that was my dream.
So we could have been
alongside radio.
We could have been interviewing about the Olympics or something.
Oh yeah, that was the hope.
We went to, that was a fascinating story because it was next to a church where the 2 groups had never met, and you kind of brought them together even though they'd lived side by side for many years. Yeah, so basically it was a very remote island with lots of churches and a very kind of a very strong Christian community throughout its whole culture. And then a mosque was built, and on its 1st anniversary, I went to the island, and because there was a bit of kind of challenge to the mosque being built in the first place. And I brought the leader of the mosque together with the leader of the church for the first time ever. They're genuinely about 100 steps away from each other, and these 2 men had never met. And I sat them down in a room, had the cameras rolling for that first awkward meeting. And they kind of concluded, the Christian minister said, okay, my concerns were unfounded, and they ended up actually uniting and kind of agreeing on other things that they never thought they would agree on. And it was for a season at the BBC called Crossing Divides, which I just think is one of the kind of best parts of journalism, is doing those kind of stories. And it's, I think all of you in your careers have found a way to have been passionate about projects and kept going until you found a way to tell those stories. If I can ask one final question, and thank you so much to everyone who sent in questions this afternoon. It's really been great to share your love and passion for audio and the radio industry as well. And I apologize for not being able to get every single question in this afternoon. Jamila sent a question in, and I'll ask this. what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you started? And if I can also ask that in a way, if there is something that perhaps differently you would like anyone listening right now to know about the business or the industry, or if there's a final message that you would like to leave everyone with about their journey, what might that be? So is there something that you wish as a starting your career you had known, or is there something you hope those watching now will hear from today? AJ, do you want to kick us off there?
Yes. There's a few things. What I would say is, you know, sometimes when you have a vision, you pour everything into your vision, but your vision just might not be appropriate, or, you know, the conditions might not just be right for it. So be flexible, be malleable, be willing to pivot and turn and you know, take opportunities, and be willing to put as much into the opportunity that you're given that you're going to put into your own like vision. And I will also say fortify yourself, because this industry, this game or whatever, as we expressed earlier, getting rejection or having to work or having to do everything yourself for a time being, it's very testing, very, very trying. So, you know, find out what relaxes you, find out how to switch off, find out, you know, who your mates are, people who can support you, get a mentor, you know, someone who's happy to give you advice and steer you and give you that time to say, yeah, really love that, but bro, you got to learn this. It's not going to happen until so on and so forth. Sometimes you do need somebody to kind of just check you, especially, you know, like I said, we can be motivated to a point of like where it just doesn't make sense. So I'm kind of talking to myself here, but that's what I would definitely say.
Is there a word of wisdom that you would have for someone starting now, or something you would have liked your younger self to know?
Yeah, so this actually came out of a podcast interview that we did literally like last week, and someone said when I was working, it was like I can't spend all these hours building someone else's dream and not finding time to build my own. And I think that really resonates for me, because I think never forget to invest in yourself and kind of like be confident in yourself. In order to achieve what you want to achieve, you need to make sure that, as well as, because you can kind of like get stuck, kind of like, especially when you're in corporate jobs, kind of like serving someone else and always doing work for someone else, but make sure you do find the time and energy to invest in yourself, so you can kind of develop the skills and the experience you need to kind of take yourself where you want to go. So that's kind of what I would say.
And Pria?
In the least kind of showy off way, know who you are and your self brand. And I say not showy off because I don't mean you need to have thousands of social followers. What I mean is just know who you are and know why you want to be in this industry, i.e. what it is you want to achieve. Because the biggest thing I've learned is who I am, i.e. what's my voice, what am I bringing to the table. You know, before I started, you know, you kind of think, right, I need to learn all of these X amount of skills, which are quite practical, and yeah, you kind of do. I'm not saying they're not important, but what keeps you in the industry and what keeps you relevant and what keeps you kind of being the person that they come to do jobs is that you are unique. You bring something to the table that the person next to you can't. And I think I've learned so much about the types of stories I want to tell and my own identity. And that doesn't mean that you become the focus of the story. It means that you choose your perspectives and you choose the people you include, the places you go to, because you know who you are. And I think that's really important in terms of your own sense of fulfillment and achievement, but also in terms of the fulfillment of the audience and what they can get out of you.
Thank you so much, Leanne, Pria, AJ. I really appreciate you sharing your time with everyone watching and listening today. I know that you are as passionate as I am about the next generation starting to make their way in the audio world and in the radio world, and love it as much as I do, and want as many people to come through the doors and have the chance to experience some of the things that we have in the industry and be part of it and show us the way and what the future might look like and what we might be doing in years to come. Because I think everyone watching now, you will be leading the way and championing this industry. So I know it may not be easy. especially at this moment in time with everything that's going on, to find that start. But I hope you can stay motivated, and hopefully we will all be working alongside many of you soon. So again, AJ, Pria, Leanne, thank you for being here today. Everyone who's watched and sent in questions, thank you for being part of this lovely event with Radiocentre and Creative Access. And I hope you participate in the next one soon, or I hope you'll be one of the panelists before too long, and you'll be telling and sharing your stories about your career with another generation of radio fans. So thank you so much for watching today and being part of the session. Thank you.